Hi everybody, Steve Griffiths here, developer of the MTPredictor software program. In today's MTPredictor video, I'd like to look at the USE minis and see how they unfolded yesterday, which was the 4th of August. We had some very interesting setups yesterday, so I'd like to take a look at a couple of those and show you perhaps some slightly different tools that we use in the MTPredictor software program. The first one I'd like to look at is on the YM. This is on a 3-minute chart. You can see this is the whole of yesterday, and we had a DP sell here which actually nailed the very high of the day. So this was the very bar, the very high of the day that the signal came in. It was actually on a black STF, so it was a valid trade setup for standard traders. But I want to show you a couple of additional reasons why this may have been a good trade to take. First and foremost, it was a VSA setup. So what's a VSA setup? Well, a VSA setup is when we have a VSA bar on our volume setting here, which goes red. Now you can see there's several other red bars, but the only time we look at these or pay attention to these is when they correspond to a bar that's made a new high or low. In other words, gone through a previous high or low. So this bar here, which was the 1027 bar, was interesting because it's a VSA bar, but it also made new highs above this previous peak. If I put a high tag on here, you'll see what I mean. Is there's the high made basically at the start of the day. The market declined down, and then on this bar pushed up through and made new highs. In other words, it was making a move to new highs. Now normally this would indicate a move to new highs on increased volume. The amateur traders would think this is buying and look to go long, and obviously that's the worst thing you could do in this case. We go back to the prior pivot, we place our DP on. Remember, these are leading indicators. These are levels of support and resistance that are on your chart in advance. And as you can see, the next bar failed to follow through. It failed to move to new highs, but more importantly, it also reversed at that DP level. So this told us that the buying, or what we thought was buying in the previous bar, was actually selling by professionals. In other words, this was a fake out. In other words, we want now to look to go short. So that's why this DP sell setup was actually a good trade to take. And if we actually put our analysis on, you can see the market did come down to the first target here, which was this level here. It reached it where a profit of approximately 3.8R or 3.8 times greater than initial risk was available. I'll just take that line off there so it doesn't confuse anything. Remember, we use correct position sizing to keep the initial risk small and under control. So that was a nice profit there. Shorting off the bar of the high of the day is always good for a day trader, but also when you can make a profit of 3.8 times greater than initial risk. So that was the first reason why that DP sell was a good trade, because it was also a VSA trade. If I clear everything off and I go back to zoom out a little bit further, and I right mouse click and do our edit wave intermediate, which is one of our other tools in our software, you can also see that this was the end of a 5-wave sequence. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, with the high here right at the minimum wave 5 WPT. Now normally we don't like trying to pick the end of a 5-wave sequence because it's like standing in front of a train. Picking the end of an impulsive wave is normally hard work. However, we know that the 5th wave is normally the last wave in a completed 5-wave sequence, so that combined with our VSA setup, combined with our DP sell, all stacked in to give us a good trade. So can you see how not only were we looking at this particular setup as an automatic MTPredictor DP sell trade setup, we're also looking at it to be a VSA setup. We're also looking at it to be the end of a 5-wave sequence. So can you see how all these other things came in together to give this higher confidence or higher probability trade that actually turned out very nicely indeed. So that was the first trade setup that I want to look at, and as you can see, the profit here at plus 3.8R or 3.8 times the initial risk was actually a very nice trade indeed. The next one I want to look at, which again was very interesting indeed, was the NQ. It wasn't an automatic setup. As you can see, we actually had an automatic sell setup on a red STF here, which was a TS3 sell setup. It didn't quite reach its first target, but it did actually come to about a 4.2R profit, so if you were short of this, you'd be locking in at least a small profit there anyway. But that's not the trade I want to look at. I also want to look at the volume here, and again look at a VSA trade setup. The trade in particular, or the bar in particular I want to look at, was this bar here, which was a bar at 1333. Again, you can see our red VSA here was telling us that this was higher than usual volume. This bar here, just as we had on the YM, was going above this previous bar's high. Can you see there if I put hover the cursor on that bar high there? Can you see how this one made a new high through this level? Again, break to new highs, higher volume would indicate potential buying, or that's what amateurs think. We go back to the prior high, we place the decision point on, and you can see the very next bar after the high volume bar, which was this one here, the 1336, the market failed to follow through. In other words, it failed to make new highs. In fact, it reversed and made a reversal at our decision point resistance area. This told us that professionals were stepping in to sell this market, and the market was then likely to decline. Now, there are several other programs out there that look at this kind of trade setup. However, at MTPredictor we have an advantage because we have other tools available to build the whole trade setup. Remember, we only want to take trades where the initial risk is kept small and under control. We do that by knowing the area or the level at which these VSA setups are going to reverse, in other words our decision point level. We also want to know how good a potential trade setup is going to be. In other words, we want a target for this trade. For this, we go back to the DP of the last swing. So this was the swing up into this high. We come down to here, we place the DP off here. This would be an area where the market is likely to reverse. And as you can see, the market went down and tagged that very nicely. We then use our risk reward tool to sell one tick below that bar, stop one tick above the bar's high, with our target down here at our decision point level. Remember, our correct position sizing keeps the initial risk small under control, and as you can see, the market declined very nicely to reach that target where a potential profit of 5 times the initial risk was available. So I wanted to highlight this to show you another trade setup that you can uncover using the MTPredictor software program, using our volume bars and our DP levels and our manual risk reward. As you can see, there was no trade setup highlighted here. It's an advanced setup that the more experienced users among you can actually find for yourselves. And this is a particular favourite of mine because it gets on the back of the professional traders. This VSA setup, or volume spike analysis as we call it, is basically showing a spike in the volume where we break to new highs or new lows, new highs in this case, and then make a fail to follow through, in other words a fake out, and reverse at our decision point resistance level to then have a move in the opposite direction to the opposing DP. A very nice trade setup indeed. So that's a couple of good trades that I just wanted to look at yesterday. If you trade the ES, we also had a DP sell there off the high of the day there very nicely, but the YM one was better because that was the end of a 5-wave sequence. So that was my favourite trade on the YM, that DP sell there, because it was a VSA setup and the end of a 5-wave sequence to come dodown there for a nice 3.8 hour profit. Then on the NQ, that VSA trade setup for a nice 5-hour profit was another good trade setup to take yesterday. So hopefully this has been a good video to show you some of the things you can do with the MTPredictor software program, particularly once you gain a deeper understanding of how the markets unfold with our volume and more advanced patterns, and then can uncover some additional great trade setups using the software. And hopefully this has been shown how we found these yesterday, which was on the 4th of August.